I poured every ounce of my life savings into a vintage food business. My family bailed on the grand opening. Then my mother casually announced, "Your aunt thinks your cousin should take over the title." I worked brutal 60-hour weeks at a logistics warehouse for 4 agonizing years to make that money. I spent my days breathing in forklift exhaust and cardboard dust, pulling pallets until my lower back felt like it was made of ground glass. Every single overtime check went straight into a separate savings account. I didn't go out, I didn't buy new clothes. I drove a battered Honda with no AC in the Texas heat because I had a singular focus. I was going to buy and completely restore a 1968 Airstream trailer. When I finally found the right one sitting in a dusty field outside Waco, it was a hollowed-out aluminum shell filled with dead wasps and dry rot, but the chassis was solid. I paid in cash, towed it back to Austin, and spent every weekend for the next year turning it into a high-end mobile espresso bar. It cost me $42,500 in total. I ripped out the fiberglass insulation myself, my skin burning and itching for days. I installed commercial-grade plumbing, heavy-duty electrical panels, custom stainless steel counters, and a top-of-the-line dual-group espresso machine. I bled inside that trailer. I sweat through my shirts in the dead of summer, wiring the generator. The Tuesday I finally got my city vendor permits, I sat on the floor of the Airstream holding the stamped piece of paper and cried. Just a few tears, but they were real. I was a business owner. I called my mom first. I genuinely expected her to scream with pride. I had talked about this dream for years. Instead, her tone over the phone was completely hollow, distracted. "That's nice, Marcus," she said, over the sound of a television blaring in the background. Wait, when's the ribbon-cutting thing?" I brushed off the weird, dismissive vibe. I figured she was just busy. I told her Saturday morning at 8:00 a.m. at the South Congress Farmers Market. It was a prime spot. The foot traffic there was legendary, and I had fought hard to get a weekend slot. She said she'd be there. She said Aunt Linda and Derek were coming too. By 9:30 a.m. that Saturday, I was standing outside my serving window, staring at the bustling plaza. The market was packed. People were walking dogs, pushing strollers, buying organic vegetables and artisan bread. My Airstream gleamed in the morning sun. I had balloons tied to the A-frame hitch. Not a single relative had shown up. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed on the prep counter. My younger brother had uploaded a massive 20-minute Facebook Live video. I tapped the screen, the bright Texas sun glaring off the glass. The entire family was packed into a rented banquet hall across town. I recognized the cheap patterned carpet and the terrible fluorescent lighting of the airport Marriott. They were all sitting in folding chairs, facing a small stage. Up on the stage was my cousin Derek, wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked brand new, holding a microphone. He was pacing back and forth, pointing at a projector screen displaying a line graph going straight up. It was his new cryptocurrency seminar. Derek hadn't held a real job in 5 years. He bounced from drop shipping to Forex trading to whatever this was, always draining Aunt Linda's bank accounts to fund his startups. I looked down at the caption my brother had typed, "Supporting real family ambition. Blood over everything." I walked back inside the trailer and sat down on a plastic milk crate behind my espresso machine. 60 vanilla scones sat untouched in the pastry case. 3 gallons of premium cold brew were just melting on ice. The hum of the generator vibrated through my boots. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a crushing, suffocating loneliness settle deep in my chest. It physically hurt. I watched the video of them cheering for Derek. They were clapping, whistling. It was the exact cheering I had dreamed of hearing at my serving window. I served a few customers, going through the motions, pulling shots, steaming milk, smiling until my face ached. Around 2:30 p.m., my mom finally called. The market was winding down. I was breaking down the pastry case, wiping crumbs into a rag. I answered the phone, half expecting a frantic apology about losing track of time. Maybe a flat tire. Maybe some emergency that explained why my entire bloodline had abandoned me on the most important day of my life. Instead, she sounded incredibly breezy and cheerful. "Hey, Marcus," she said, her voice bright. "Aunt Linda had a brilliant idea at the seminar today. She thinks you should legally transfer the Airstream's vehicle title to Derek's holding company." I stopped wiping the counter. "What? Derek's holding company?" she repeated, speaking slowly as if I were a child failing to grasp simple math. "He needs a tangible corporate asset to secure a business loan for his server expansion. It just makes sense, Marcus. It keeps the wealth in our circle. It's safer that way." I gripped the stainless steel prep counter so hard my knuckles turned entirely white. The cold metal bit into my palm. My own mother had skipped the biggest day of my life, the culmination of 4 years of warehouse labor. And now she was calling to ask me to cannibalize my blood, sweat, and tears for Derek's latest financial scam. "Mom, you didn't come today," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet. She sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "Oh, don't start with the guilt trip. We were supporting Derek. He's building a real enterprise. You're selling coffee out of a camper. Families need to build collective wealth. You get it, right? Just bring the paperwork by the house tomorrow." She hung up. I spent that entire night staring at the ceiling of my apartment, my chest tight, unable to draw a full breath. 3 days later, things escalated from disrespectful to insane. I parked the rig at my rented commissary kitchen lot on Tuesday afternoon to restock my syrups and deep clean the espresso heads. The lot was a dusty gravel expanse surrounded by a chain-link fence on the east side of town. I went inside the main building for about an hour to use the commercial dishwashers. I came back out at 4:45 p.m. carrying a crate of clean milk pitchers. I stopped dead in my tracks. The heavy steel padlock on the Airstream's tow hitch was completely severed. It was lying in the dirt, the shackle sliced clean through, probably with bolt cutters. Pure panic spiked in my throat. I dropped the crate. Plastic pitchers clattered across the gravel. I ran to the trailer and yanked the side service door open, fully expecting to find tweakers stripping my copper wiring. My mom, Aunt Linda, and Derek were standing inside my custom kitchen. Derek was literally measuring my dual-group espresso machine with a yellow Stanley tape measure. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Marcus, you're back early," Mom stammered. She actually had the nerve to look slightly embarrassed, taking a quick step back toward the serving window. Aunt Linda didn't flinch. She just smirked confidently, leaning her weight against my commercial fridge, her arms crossed over her floral blouse. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "You cut my lock!" "We were just doing some logistics," Linda said smoothly, entirely unbothered by my screaming. "Derek's going to swap out the coffee gear for mobile crypto mining servers. The aluminum shell is perfect for heat dissipation if we install ventilation fans on the roof. We figured we'd put your little coffee pots in a storage unit for now. You can keep the scones or whatever." The audacity made the blood roar in my ears. I literally couldn't process the words coming out of her mouth. They had broken into my property to measure it for a hostile takeover. "Get out," I said. My hands were shaking. "Get out right now before I call the police!" Mom rolled her eyes, stepping forward to put a hand on my arm. I flinched away from her. "Don't be dramatic, Marcus," she scolded, as if I had just spilled a glass of milk. "Derek needs a mobile showroom to attract serious investors. You barely make a profit anyway. We're a family. We share resources." I had given Mom the commissary security gate code for emergencies 6 months ago, back when I was pulling late nights working on the electrical system. system. I thought if I got hurt, she'd need to know how to get in. I never imagined she'd use it to orchestrate the theft of my livelihood. I'm not giving Derek my business. I am not giving you the title. Get the hell out of my trailer, I screamed. I grabbed the tape measure out of Derek's hand and threw it out the open door. It bounced off the gravel. Aunt Linda scoffed, pushing off the fridge. Fine, we'll give you a few days to cool off, but you're being incredibly selfish, Marcus. Don't think the family won't hear about this. They filed out. Mom wouldn't look me in the eye as she stepped down the stairs. Derek brushed past my shoulder, glaring at me. I slammed the door behind them and locked it from the inside, sinking down onto the rubber floor mats, my heart hammering against my ribs. That evening, I didn't take the Airstream back to my apartment. I drove the rig across county lines to a highly secure, gated RV facility I found on my phone. It had barbed wire, keycard access, and 24-hour security cameras. I paid for 3 months up front in cash. Driving away from it that night in my Honda, I didn't feel relief. I felt pure, icy resolve. The sadness was gone. It had burned away, leaving something hard and sharp in its place. The next morning, I walked into the downtown offices of a commercial attorney named Ellis Brennan. He was a ruthless, humorless guy in his 50s with a dark wood desk and a gaze that made you feel like you were under a microscope. I sat in his leather chair and laid out everything. The warehouse, the money, the title request, the Facebook video, and the severed padlock. I showed him the photo I took of the broken lock sitting in the dirt. Ellis listened in complete silence. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. Toxic relatives will bleed you dry with emotional warfare, Ellis warned me, his voice gravelly. They rely on the social contract. They rely on the fact that you won't treat them like criminals because you share a bloodline. If you want to keep this business, you have to stop treating them like family and start treating them like a hostile corporate entity. So, I learned the rules of their game. I paid Ellis his retainer. Over the next 2 weeks, we moved fast. I filed a preemptive restraining order against Aunt Linda and Derek. Ellis helped me legally transfer the Airstream's vehicle title and all associated business assets into a newly formed blind trust. Finally, we drafted a heavy civil lawsuit for trespassing, destruction of property, and attempted grand theft. I didn't answer a single text or call from my mother during those 2 weeks. My phone blew up with messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins calling me a traitor, a selfish prick, a failure who was jealous of Derek's success. I read every single one, deleted them, and kept working. A month after the break-in, I sent a text to Derek and Mom. I've thought about it. Meet me at the Airstream at the new lot. I have the paperwork to finalize the transition. They showed up at the RV facility an hour later, pulling up to the security gate in Linda's pristine SUV. I walked out to meet them in the visitor parking lot. They stepped out of the car, practically vibrating with greed. Mom looked relieved, smiling like everything was back to normal. Aunt Linda looked entirely smug. Derek didn't even say hello. He just walked up to me and held out a silver pen. I didn't take the pen. I reached into my jacket and dropped a thick, heavy manila envelope onto the hood of Linda's SUV. Derek eagerly ripped it open, tearing the paper. He pulled out the stack of documents. Instead of a signed vehicle title, he found the active restraining order, stamped by a judge. Beneath that were the time-stamped security photos from the commissary lot, clearly showing them breaking the hitch padlock with bolt cutters. Beneath that was the drafted felony police report. Derek stared at the paper. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "What is this garbage?" Aunt Linda shrieked, leaning over his shoulder to read the bold legal print. "This," I said calmly, looking right at her, "is a legally binding injunction. It means you have to stay 500 feet away from me, my residence, and my commercial property. One step closer to my business, and my attorney files these felony charges for attempted grand theft." The parking lot went dead silent. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Mom was staring at me in absolute horror, her hands covering her mouth. "You can't do this to us," Mom whispered. "We're your family. You lost the right to call yourselves that when you brought bolt cutters to my business," I said. I pointed toward the exit. "Get out!" Linda's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She grabbed the papers from Derek and threw them at my chest. They scattered across the hot asphalt. "You arrogant little piece of shit. You think some pieces of paper are going to stop us from taking what's owed to this family?" I didn't flinch. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch out. Derek paused with his hand on the SUV's door handle. His face was flushed violently red, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight collar. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice trembling with a terrifying, unearned confidence. "Family takes care of family, Marcus. You're going to learn what happens when you turn your back on your own blood." They got in the car and peeled out of the lot, throwing gravel against the security fence. I picked up the papers, dusted off the tire tracks, and went back to work. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had built a wall high enough to keep them out. I was wrong. The first week of September was supposed to be my most profitable week of the quarter. The weather in Austin finally broke, the relentless heat giving way to a cool breeze that made people crave hot lattes instead of iced cold brew. I was scheduled for the main plaza at a massive weekend artisan festival. I had spent nearly $800 on premium beans, fresh local milk, and artisan pastries. On Thursday afternoon, I was at the commissary kitchen prepping syrups when my phone rang. It was Nora Voss, the event coordinator for the festival. "Marcus, hi," Nora said. Her voice sounded incredibly tight, strained with an awkward professional distance. "I'm calling about your vendor slot for this weekend." "Hey, Nora," I said, wiping vanilla extract off my hands. "I'm all set, just prepping the final inventory now. I'll be loading in at 5 a.m. on Saturday." "Actually, Marcus, we need to cancel your placement." I stopped wiping my hands. The rag fell onto the counter. "Cancel? Nora, we signed the contract 2 months ago. I've already paid the vendor fee and bought $1,000 in perishable inventory." I could hear her shuffling papers on her desk. "I know, and I'm sorry, but we received an email this morning from your chief financial officer. He informed us that your business is currently undergoing Chapter 11 restructuring and that your liability insurance has lapsed. We simply can't have an uninsured vendor on city property. It's a massive liability." My stomach dropped into my shoes. "My CFO? Nora, I'm a sole proprietor. I don't have a CFO. Who sent that email?" "The email came from Derek Halverson," she said. "He provided a signed corporate resolution." The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Halverson, Aunt Linda's maiden name. Derek was using it to sound legitimate. "Nora, listen to me," I said, my voice rising in panic. "That man is my cousin. We are estranged. I have a restraining order against him. He is legally barred from interacting with my business. My insurance is fully paid up through next year. I can send you the certificate right now." "Marcus, please don't yell at me," Nora said, her tone icing over. "The email included a PDF of a filed mechanic's lien against your Airstream. He claims you owe his holding company $42,000 for equipment installations and that the trailer is subject to immediate repossession. The festival board reviewed it. We can't have a repo company towing a vendor rig out of the plaza while families are trying to buy kettle corn. It's final. We're refunding your vendor fee." She hung up before I could say another word. I stood in the commissary kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears. A mechanic's lien. Derek had actually forged a legal document claiming he did the restoration work on my Airstream and he filed it with the county. He didn't just want to steal the physical trailer anymore. He wanted to salt the earth so I couldn't survive. My phone buzzed again. A notification from Yelp, then a notification from Google Business, then 3 more. I opened the app. My perfect 5-star rating was plummeting in real time. A 1-star review from an account named Crypto King 99. Owner is a scam artist. Stole his business model from his family. Coffee tastes like rat poison. A 1-star review from Austin Local. Saw the owner screaming at an elderly woman. Absolute psychopath. Do not support this business. A 1-star review from Derek H. Failed business. Currently in bankruptcy. Owner refuses to pay his contractors. They were flooding my pages. Derek had weaponized his seminar attendees, his little network of crypto bros, to systematically destroy my digital storefront. I grabbed my keys and sprinted to my car. I needed to get to Ellis Brennan's office before 5 o'clock. I threw the Honda into reverse, my tires spinning in the gravel lot. I merged onto the highway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my wrists ached. I pulled up to the parking meter outside Ellis's building and grabbed my wallet to pay the meter through the app. Payment declined. I frowned. I had over $4,000 in my business checking account. I closed the app, reopened it, and tried again. Payment declined. Please contact your financial institution. A cold, heavy dread settled at the base of my spine. I sat in the driver's seat, the city traffic rushing past my window, and opened my banking app. The screen loaded. My available balance read $0. In red text beneath the balance, a small system message was displayed. Account frozen pending legal dispute. Lien execution active. Derek hadn't just sent an email to the festival. He had taken his fraudulent, forged mechanics lien straight to my bank. He used his fake holding company to file a claim against my assets, and the bank's automated system had instantly frozen my operating capital until the dispute could be resolved in court. I couldn't buy gas. I couldn't buy milk. I couldn't pay my commissary rent. I sat in the sweltering heat of the Honda, staring at the red 0 on my phone screen. They didn't need to break the padlock again. They had found a way to lock me out of my own life without ever stepping foot on my property. I tore the center console apart. I dug under the passenger seat, scraping my knuckles against the metal tracks, pulling up sticky pennies, a dime, quarters covered in lint. I managed to scrounge exactly $2.15. I fed it into the meter, watching the digital display grant me 36 minutes. I sprinted into the lobby of Ellis's building and rode the elevator up to the 4th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The receptionist, a quiet woman named Simone, took one look at my pale, sweating face and buzzed me straight back. Ellis was on the phone, but when he saw me standing in his doorway, clutching my phone like a live grenade, he held up a finger, murmured something into his headset, and disconnected. They froze my accounts, I blurted out, stepping into the office. Derek filed a mechanics lien. He sent it to the festival board and my bank. I have $0 in my operating account. I can't even buy gas to get home. Ellis didn't look surprised. He didn't gasp or express outrage. He just opened his laptop and adjusted his glasses. Sit down, Marcus. Let's look at the damage. I collapsed into the leather chair opposite his desk. I pulled up the PDF Nora had forwarded me and emailed it to him. I sat there shaking while he read it in complete silence. The clock on his wall ticked. Every second felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. It's a textbook fraudulent lien, Ellis finally said, leaning back. He's claiming his holding company, Halverson Enterprises, performed $42,000 worth of custom fabrication and electrical work on your vehicle, and that you defaulted on the invoice. He filed it with the county clerk. But he didn't do anything, I yelled, my voice cracking. I did all the work. I have the receipts for the materials from Home Depot. I have photos of me doing the installation. He's never even held a screwdriver in that trailer. I know, Ellis said calmly, and the court will eventually know that too. But right now, the bank doesn't care about the truth. Banks operate on risk mitigation algorithms. The moment a registered business entity files a lien against your LLC, the bank's automated compliance system freezes your assets to prevent capital flight. They don't investigate, they just lock the doors. So unlock them, I pleaded. You're a lawyer. Call a judge. Tell them it's fake, Ellis sighed, taking off his glasses. It doesn't work like that, Marcus. We have to file an emergency motion to expunge a fraudulent lien. We have to schedule a hearing. We have to serve Derek. The courts are backed up. Best case scenario, we get in front of a judge in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? I stared at him, the blood draining from my face. Ellis, I can't survive 3 days. I have perishable inventory rotting in the commissary right now. I have rent due to the commissary manager on the 1st. I have auto insurance drafts, internet, phone. If I can't operate this weekend, I lose the revenue I need to survive the month. I will go bankrupt. That is exactly what your cousin is banking on, Ellis said, his voice dropping an octave. It's a siege tactic. Toxic litigation 101. They don't need a real legal case. They just need to starve you out before you can get to a courtroom. He knows you're a cash flow dependent business. He's weaponized the legal system to cut off your air supply. I rubbed my hands over my face, pressing my palms into my eyes until I saw stars. The sheer suffocating injustice of it made me want to scream until my throat bled. I did everything right. I worked the warehouse. I saved the money. I got the permits. I built a beautiful, honest business. And because I shared blood with a parasite, it was all being dismantled by a forged piece of paper. The blind trust? I said, looking up suddenly. We moved the title to the blind trust. Doesn't that protect me? It protects the physical asset, Ellis confirmed. They cannot legally tow or repossess the airstream. The trust shields the title. But they hit your operating LLC's bank account, which we were still in the process of migrating under the trust's financial umbrella. He aimed for your wallet, not the trailer. So what do I do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ellis leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. Right now, you survive. Do you have personal savings? Credit cards? Anyone you can borrow from? I poured every dime into the bill, I said. My personal checking has maybe $200 in it. My credit cards are maxed from buying the espresso machine. Then you're going to have to get creative, Ellis said, because I need to bill you for drafting this emergency motion, and the filing fees alone are going to run about $400. I can defer my hourly rate until we unfreeze the account, but the county wants their money up front. I nodded numbly. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. Don't talk to them, Marcus, Ellis warned as I reached the door. Derek is trying to force a settlement. He's going to offer you a way out. Do not engage. I took the elevator back down to the lobby. My 36 minutes were up, but thankfully, there was no neon green envelope tucked under my wiper blade. I sat in the stifling heat of the Honda, staring blankly at the steering wheel. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email notification. The sender was an automated DocuSign service, but the custom message attached to it was from Derek. Subject, settlement agreement, lien release. Message, hey man, things got a little out of hand. Mom and Aunt Linda are really stressed about this family rift. I talked to my board, and we're willing to withdraw the lien and unfreeze your accounts immediately. All you have to do is sign the attached operating agreement. We restructure. You keep 49% of the coffee profits. Halverson Enterprises takes 51% and control of the physical asset. You can keep running the day-to-day. Win-win. Sign it, and you'll have your money back by tomorrow morning. Don't be stubborn. Blood over everything. I stared at the screen. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. He wasn't even trying to hide the extortion. He had created the problem, and now he was generously offering to sell me the solution in exchange for half my company and full control of my Airstream. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I wanted to throw the phone out the window, but I didn't delete it. I forwarded it to Ellis with the subject line, Exhibit A for the extortion case. Then I put the phone in the cup holder and started the engine. I drove straight to the commissary kitchen. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dusty shadows across the gravel lot. I parked next to the main building and walked inside. The heavy scent of roasted garlic and baking bread hung in the air from the other prep cooks working their evening shifts. I found Faye, the commissary manager, sitting in her cramped office near the loading dock. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had run food trucks in Austin since the 90s. She didn't take crap from anyone, but she had a soft spot for the vendors who actually kept their stations clean. Marcus, she said, looking up from her ledger. Heard about the South Congress Festival you got bounced? Word traveled fast in the local food scene. Yeah, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Supplier dispute. A fake one, but it's tying up my accounts, which is why I'm here. Faye set her pen down. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening into a professional mask. Rent is due on the 1st, Marcus. Friday. I know, I said. And I'm locked out of my bank account until my lawyer gets a judge to drop this fraudulent lien. It might take 2 or 3 weeks. I'm asking for a grace period, just for the month. Once the freeze lifts, I'll pay you the month plus a 10% late penalty. Faye sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. I like you, kid. You hustle. You mop the floors without me having to yell at you. But this is a business. I got 5 other food trucks on a wait list who can pay me cash tomorrow for your spot and your prep hours. If I let you slide, I have to let the taco guy slide and the vegan bakery slide. I can't do it. Faye, please, I said, dropping my pride completely. If I lose my commissary contract, I violate my health department permit. I literally won't be legally allowed to operate anywhere in the county. Even if I get the freeze lifted, they will pull my vendor license. She looked at me for a long time. She saw the desperation in my eyes, the dark circles, the sweat on my collar. Friday at 5:00 p.m., Faye said quietly. If you don't have $850 in my hand by Friday at 5:00 p.m., I clear your shelf in the walk-in and I void your contract. That's the best I can do. Thank you, I breathed. I walked back out to my car. It was Tuesday evening. I had exactly 3 days to come up with $850 for Faye, plus $400 for Ellis's filing fees, $1,250, and I had $2.15 to my name. I couldn't use the Airstream because my inventory was rotting and I couldn't buy new supplies. I couldn't operate at festivals because Derek was systematically emailing event coordinators with his fake lien. I got into the Honda and drove to my apartment. It was a tiny studio over a detached garage in a residential neighborhood. I walked inside, didn't turn on the lights, and sat on the edge of my mattress. I opened my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. I bypassed family completely. I was dead to them and they were dead to me. I scrolled past old co-workers from the warehouse. I scrolled past high school friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I stopped on a name, Conrad. Conrad was a guy I used to pull night shifts with at the logistics warehouse. He was rough around the edges, heavily tattooed, and drove a beat-up box truck that he used for side hustles. We weren't best friends, but we had a mutual respect born from unloading thousands of pallets together in the sweltering heat. I remembered him talking about how much money he made doing last-minute, off-the-books hauling for estate sales and foreclosures. I tapped his name. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Marcus? Conrad's voice boomed over the line, accompanied by the sound of wind and road noise. Ain't heard from you since you quit to go sling bean water. How's the coffee game? It's hitting a speed bump, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Conrad, I need cash. Fast. Do you have any hauling jobs this week? Anything you need a second set of hands for? I can lift heavy. You know I can. There was a pause on the line. The road noise hissed. You serious? You want to come back to breaking your back? I'm dead serious. I need $1,200 by Friday. Man, $1,200 is a steep order for a few days of labor, Conrad said slowly. But actually, you might be calling at the right time. I got a contract clearing out a defunct commercial office park out near Round Rock. The management company wants the whole building gutted by Thursday night so the demo crews can come in Friday morning. It's brutal work. Tearing up industrial carpeting, hauling out heavy steel desks, hauling literal tons of junk to the dump. I was going to hire day laborers, but if you want in, I'll split the contract with you. How much? I asked. It pays $2,000 total, so $1,000 for your cut. Cash in hand Thursday night when we lock the gate. $1,000. It wasn't the full $1,250, but it was enough to cover Faye's rent and part of the legal fees. I could figure out the rest. I'm in, I said. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. Wear boots you don't care about and bring work gloves. It's gonna be nasty. I hung up the phone. I set an alarm for 4 a.m. I walked into my tiny kitchen and opened the pantry. I had half a box of stale pasta, a jar of generic peanut butter, and tap water. I boiled the pasta, ate it plain over the sink, and went to bed. The next 3 days were a blur of pure physical agony. The office park in Round Rock had been abandoned for years. The AC was dead. The air inside was thick with dust, mold, and trapped Texas heat. For 14 hours a day, Conrad and I ripped up moldy carpet, shattered drywall, and lugged massive solid oak conference tables down flights of stairs because the elevators were dead. My hands blistered through my leather work gloves. My lower back screamed with the familiar grinding pain of my warehouse days. Every time I hoisted a steel filing cabinet onto my shoulder, I thought about Derek sitting in an air-conditioned room, refreshing his cryptocurrency charts, waiting for me to break. I thought about my mother sipping iced tea on her porch, convinced she was teaching me a lesson about family loyalty. That rage fueled me. I didn't stop for lunch. I barely stopped for water. Conrad watched me work with wide eyes, eventually just stepping back and letting me attack the debris like a man possessed. By Thursday evening at 8:30 p.m., the building was completely empty. We locked the heavy glass doors and stood in the parking lot, completely covered in a thick layer of gray dust and sweat. Conrad pulled a thick wad of bills from his pocket and counted out 10 $100 bills. He handed them to me. You're a machine, Marcus, he said, shaking his head. I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but whoever is on the other side of it better watch their back. Thanks, Conrad, I rasped. My throat felt like sandpaper. I drove home, clutching the cash. I had $1,000. I needed $250 more. I walked into my apartment and started looking around. I didn't own much of value. I had poured it all into the Airstream. My TV was a cheap hand-me-down. My laptop was 6 years old and barely held a charge. Then my eyes landed on the top shelf of my closet. Sitting in a clear plastic display case was a vintage 1980s espresso hand grinder. It was a beautiful piece of Italian engineering, made of brass and solid walnut. It was a gift. My mother had given it to me when I first started talking about opening a coffee business, back when she still pretended to support me, back before Derek's get-rich-quick schemes consumed her entire worldview. I had looked up the value once out of curiosity. It was a rare collector's item worth about $300. I had kept it on the shelf to remind me of the mother I thought I had. I grabbed the case, walked back out to my car, and drove to an all-night pawn shop on Lamar Boulevard. The guy behind the counter was eating a gas station sandwich. He looked at the grinder, looked at his computer, and offered me $260. I took the cash without a second thought. Friday morning, I was waiting outside Ellis Brennan's office before the receptionist even arrived. When Simone unlocked the glass doors at 8 a.m., I walked in and placed 4 crisp $100 bills on her desk. For Ellis, I said. Filing fees for the emergency motion. She blinked, looking at the cash. I'll make sure he gets it, Marcus. At 4:45 p.m., I walked into the commissary kitchen. The evening rush of prep cooks was just starting. I found Faye by the loading dock, inspecting a pallet of tomatoes. I pulled the remaining $850 out of my pocket and held it out to her. The bills were slightly crumpled, dirty with dust from the Round Rock demolition. Faye looked at the money, then looked up at my face. She saw the exhaustion etched into my skin, the fresh blisters on my palms, the dust still clinging to my hairline. She took the cash and tucked it into her clipboard. Your shelf in the walk-in is safe, Faye said. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Rent is paid through the end of the month. Thank you, I said. I walked back out to my car. I was physically broken. Every muscle in my body felt like it had been run through a meat grinder. I had exactly $10 left to my name. My bank account was still frozen. The fake reviews were still up. My family was still trying to destroy me. But I had survived the siege. They tried to starve me out, and they failed. I sat in the driver's seat, pulled out my phone, and opened the Yelp app. I navigated to my business page. The overall rating had dropped to 2.1 stars, flooded with one-star vitriol from people who had never even seen my trailer. I clicked on the review from Crypto King 99, the one calling me a scam artist. I tapped the reply as owner button. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't write a long defensive paragraph. I didn't explain the family drama. I just typed one single sentence. This matter has been forwarded to my attorney and is now part of an active civil lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference. I copied the sentence and pasted it under every single fake review Derek and his network had left. I didn't care if it actually scared them. I wanted them to know I was still standing. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text message from Aunt Linda. You are making a massive mistake, Marcus. We tried to do this the easy way, but if you want to play dirty, Derek has friends at the city health department. Don't think your little trailer is untouchable just because it's parked behind a gate. I read the text 3 times. The blue light from my screen was the only thing illuminating the cramped interior of my Honda. My hands were still stiff and cramping from tearing up industrial carpet for Conrad, but I managed to press the buttons to take a screenshot. I didn't reply to Aunt Linda. I didn't type out a furious paragraph calling her bluff or screaming about the sheer illegality of her threat. Ellis had made the rules of engagement crystal clear. Toxic people feed on your emotional reactions. You starve them by going completely silent. I opened my email, attached the screenshot, and sent it to Ellis with a short subject line. Exhibit B, Health Department threat. Then I put the car in gear and drove the rest of the way to my apartment. The weekend was a masterclass in psychological torture. Usually Saturday and Sunday were my adrenaline days. I'd be up by 4 a.m., pulling shots, steaming milk, talking to hundreds of people at the farmer's market, riding the high of running my own business. The exhaustion I usually felt on a Sunday night was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something real. Instead, I sat in my tiny studio apartment in absolute silence. I had $10 left to my name. I went to the discount grocery store down the street and spent 8 of it on a 5-pound bag of dry pinto beans and a bag of white rice. That was my food budget for the foreseeable future. I spent Saturday boiling beans on my cheap electric stove, icing my lower back, and watching the clock on the microwave tick by. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart rate spiked, expecting another threat, another fake review, another legal trap Derek had set for me. Monday morning at 9:15 a.m., the trap finally sprang. My phone rang on the kitchen counter. It was Faye. Marcus, she said, her voice tight and low, lacking her usual gruff warmth. You need to get down here. To the commissary? I asked, sitting up straight. What's wrong? Did I leave a mess in the walk-in? No, there's a city health inspector here, a guy named Silas. I've known the inspectors for this district for 10 years. I've never seen this man in my life. He bypassed the main kitchen, ignored the other food trucks, and walked straight to your prep shelf in the walk-in. He's asking for your daily temperature logs, your sanitation manifests, and your gray water disposal receipts. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Derek has friends at the city health department. Faye, I haven't operated in a week. My logs are blank for the last 4 days. I told him that, Faye said, dropping her voice to a whisper. He doesn't care. He says if you aren't here in 20 minutes to provide access to your physical vehicle for a spot inspection, he's issuing a default suspension of your mobile vending permit for failure to comply. I'm on my way, I said. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. The drive to the commissary was a blur of traffic lights and morning commuters. I pulled into the gravel lot 19 minutes later. A white Ford Escape with the city municipal seal on the door was parked right in front of the loading dock. A man was leaning against the fender holding a metal clipboard. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a polo shirt stretched tight over a slight gut, khakis, and dark sunglasses. I walked up to him. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. You Silas? He didn't take off his sunglasses. He just looked down at his clipboard and made a slow, deliberate check mark with his pen. Marcus Halverson? I didn't correct him on the last name. I didn't care. I'm Marcus. I'm the owner of the Airstream Espresso Bar. Faye said you needed to see my logs. I need to inspect the primary vending unit, Silas said, his voice a flat, bored monotone. We received an anonymous tip regarding unsanitary backflow in your espresso boiler system and improper gray water storage. Since you serve dairy, that's a priority 1 health hazard. An anonymous tip? I repeated. I could feel the anger bubbling up in my throat, hot and sharp. From an anonymous tipster who happens to be involved in a civil lawsuit against me? Silas finally looked up. He adjusted his sunglasses. I don't care about your personal legal problems. I care about the municipal health code. Where's the unit? It's not here. It's parked at a secure storage facility on the north side. Then you're going to drive there right now, and I'm going to follow you, Silas said, tapping the clipboard against his thigh. Or I can red tag your permit right here in the parking lot, and you can appeal it next month. Your call. I turned around, got back into my Honda, and drove to the RV facility. The white city vehicle stayed glued to my bumper the entire way. When we got to the gate, I scanned my keycard. The heavy iron gates rolled back. I led Silas to the back corner of the lot where my 1968 Airstream sat gleaming in the morning sun. I unlocked the service door and stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling faintly of roasted coffee beans and industrial stainless steel cleaner. Silas stepped in behind me. The trailer shifted slightly under our combined weight. For the next 45 minutes, I watched a man desperately try to find a reason to destroy my life. Silas was relentless. He checked the rubber gaskets on the commercial fridge. He unscrewed the drain covers on the 3-compartment sink, shining a heavy mag light down the PVC pipes. He demanded I turn on the generator so he could test the ambient temperature of the pastry case. He ran the hot water tap, sticking a digital thermometer under the stream, waiting for it to drop below the required 120 degrees. It didn't. I had built this trailer with my own 2 hands. I knew the plumbing better than I knew my own heartbeat. I had over-engineered everything. The fridge held at a perfect 36 degrees. The water was scalding hot. The prep surfaces were spotless. I stood by the door, watching him get increasingly frustrated. He was pulling out drawers, checking behind the espresso machine for stray coffee grounds, running his finger along the baseboard, looking for mouse droppings. There was nothing. Finally, Silas walked over to the serving window. He crouched down, shining his flashlight at the floor where the clean water tank connected connected to the internal pump. He stood up, wiping a tiny smudge of dust off his finger. Your fresh water intake line is lacking a certified secondary backflow preventer, Silas said smoothly. I stared at him. It has a primary check valve built into the pump. That's up to county code. It passed the initial inspection 2 months ago with the exact same setup. Code updates, Silas lied effortlessly, writing furiously on his clipboard. And frankly, given the layout, the proximity of the fresh water line to the gray water exhaust creates a cross-contamination risk. I'm writing this up as a critical violation. You're lying, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. You can't point to a single actual violation in this trailer, so you're inventing a technicality. How much is Derek paying you? Or is Linda just calling in a favor? Silas stopped writing. He looked at me, a nasty little smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He ripped a heavy yellow carbon copy sheet off his clipboard and slapped it onto my stainless steel prep counter. Notice of immediate suspension, Silas said. Your mobile food vending permit is officially suspended pending a full plumbing retrofit and a secondary inspection. Do not attempt to operate, or you will face municipal fines of up to $2,000 a day. When can I get a secondary inspection? I asked, staring at the yellow paper. We're pretty backed up, Silas said, stepping out the door and down the aluminum stairs. Probably 3 to 4 weeks. Have a good day, Marcus. I stood alone in the Airstream, listening to his Ford Escape crunch across the gravel and drive away. 3 to 4 weeks. My bank account was frozen. My commissary rent was paid for the month, but without a permit, I couldn't sell a single cup of coffee to make money for next month's rent, or for groceries, or for Ellis's hourly legal fees. I reached into my pocket to call Ellis. Before I could even dial the number, a shadow fell across the open doorway of the trailer. I looked up. It was Duncan, the manager of the RV facility. He was an older guy, usually laid back, wearing a faded denim shirt and chewing on a toothpick. He wasn't smiling. Hey, Marcus, Duncan said, leaning against the doorframe. He glanced over his shoulder toward the main gate, then looked back at me. Was that a city health inspector? Yeah, I said, rubbing my temples. Just a random spot check. Bureaucratic nightmare. Duncan chewed on his toothpick for a long moment. I saw him slap a yellow tag on the counter through the window. That's a suspension notice, right? I froze. Duncan, it's a technicality. I'm fighting it. I have a lawyer handling it. Duncan sighed, taking his hat off and running a hand over his bald head. Look, man, I run a quiet facility here. Lots of retirees keeping their luxury motorhomes safe. I don't ask questions, but my commercial insurance policy is crystal clear. I cannot knowingly harbor a commercial vehicle that has an active municipal code violation or a suspended health permit. It's a massive liability for my underwriters. If this thing catches fire, or if the city decides to come audit my lot because you're parked here, I lose my own business license. Duncan, please, I begged, taking a step toward him. It's a fake violation. My family is trying to force a hostile takeover of my business, and they called in a dirty inspector to squeeze me. I just need to keep it parked here until my lawyer gets a judge to look at the paperwork. I sympathize, I really do, Duncan said, looking genuinely apologetic but entirely unmovable. But family drama isn't my problem. My insurance policy is. You paid for 3 months up front. I'm going to cut you a check right now for the remaining 2.5 months, prorated, but you can't stay here. The ground felt like it was tilting beneath my feet. Duncan, I don't have anywhere else to put it. I live in a studio apartment with street parking. I can't park a 20-foot commercial trailer on a residential street. The city will tow it in 12 hours. You have until Friday at noon to move the rig off my property, Marcus, Duncan said quietly. If it's not gone by Friday, I have to call a commercial wrecker to impound it. I'm sorry. He turned and walked away, his boots crunching in the gravel. I sat down on the rubber floor mat of the Airstream. The walls of the shiny aluminum shell suddenly felt like a cage. I was being hunted, systematically dismantled. Every time I found a safe harbor, Derek and Aunt Linda found a way to poison the water. They had frozen my cash. They had destroyed my digital reputation. They had stripped me of my legal right to operate. And now they had effectively evicted my business from its only physical safe haven. I had no permit. I had no money for a tow truck. I had nowhere to tow it even if I did. My phone vibrated in my hand. I looked at the screen. It was a voicemail notification. The transcription generated a few seconds later. It was from my mother. I tapped play, holding the speaker to my ear. Hi, Marcus. My mother's voice drifted out of the phone. She didn't sound angry. She sounded incredibly gentle, almost mournful, the tone of a mother speaking to a sick child. I heard about the trouble with your health permit today. Honey, you are running yourself into the ground. Aunt Linda is having heart palpitations from all the stress you're putting this family through. Derek is just trying to protect our collective future, and you're fighting us like we're your enemies. Please, just stop this. Come over to the house tonight. I'll make a roast. Derek has the new contract printed out. You sign it, the permit problem goes away, the bank freeze goes away, and we can all just go back to being a family. We love you, Marcus. Don't make us do this the hard way. She hung up. I sat in the sweltering heat of the trailer, the silence rushing back in, thick and suffocating. I pressed replay. I sat there in the stifling heat of the trailer and listened to my own mother use the word love as a weapon. It was the clearest she had sounded in months. She wasn't rambling about collective wealth or crypto algorithms. She was delivering a perfectly calculated, ice-cold ultimatum. Sign the contract, the permit problem goes away. She had just admitted out loud on a recorded line that they orchestrated the health inspection. She had admitted that the suspension of my permit wasn't about sanitation, but about forcing a transfer of equity. I didn't delete it. I saved the audio file, attached it to an email, and sent it to Ellis. Subject, Exhibit C, the ransom note. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Ellis. He didn't bother with his usual dry greeting. Did you just send me a recorded confession of tortious interference? Ellis asked. His gravelly voice actually sounded energized. Is that what that is? I asked, wiping a line of sweat from my forehead. The inside of the Airstream was creeping past 90 degrees with the AC off. Marcus, she explicitly linked the release of a municipal hold to a forced transfer of business assets, Ellis said, the typing on his end loud and fast. In the state of Texas, they just crossed the line from a civil dispute into criminal extortion. The problem with toxic families is they get so used to getting their way through guilt and bullying, they forget that outside their little bubble, the real world has laws. Does this get my bank account unfrozen? I asked. My voice was completely hollow. I was too exhausted to feel vindicated. It gives me the ammunition to bypass the standard clerk queue, Ellis said. I'm filing an emergency ex parte motion tomorrow morning with the district judge. I'm going to attach the sworn transcript of this voicemail, but it's still going to take at least 48 hours for a judge to review it. Where's the physical trailer right now? Sitting on Duncan's lot. He gave me until Friday noon to move it, or he calls a commercial wrecker. I can't afford a tow, Ellis. I have $10 left, and even if I could, I have nowhere to put it. City code says I can't park a red-tagged commercial vehicle on a residential street. Get it out of Travis County, Ellis ordered. If the city health department red-tagged it, Silas and his boss only have jurisdiction within city limits. You need to move it to private, unincorporated land. You need a county without a strict commercial storage ordinance. Call whoever you have to call. Just get it over the county line before Friday. If they impound that trailer, Derek will buy it at the city auction for pennies on the dollar before we ever see the inside of a courtroom. Ellis hung up. I sat in the dark aluminum shell. I had 72 hours to move a 3-ton trailer with no money and no truck. I pulled up my contacts and called Conrad. He picked up on the second ring, the sound of a roaring engine in the background. Tell me you don't have another office parked to gut, Conrad yelled over the noise. Because my lower back is still screaming from the last one. No demo work this time, I said. Conrad, I need a massive favor. I need to tow my rig out of the city limits, and I have absolutely nowhere to put it. Do you know anyone with land out in the county? Someone who doesn't ask questions and won't care about a suspended health permit sticker on the window? Conrad went quiet for a second, the engine noise downshifting. Man, you are really in the thick of it with these people, aren't you? They're trying to impound it on Friday. All right, let me make a call, Conrad said. I know a guy named Garrett Kellner. He runs an automotive salvage yard out past Bastrop. It's off the grid, mostly dirt and rust, but it's private property and it's heavily fenced. Let me see if he'll let you park it behind the crusher for a few weeks. I can't pay him, I admitted, the shame burning in my chest. I literally can't pay him right now. My accounts are still frozen. I'll vouch for you, Conrad said simply. I'll tell him you're good for it when the dust settles. Be at the RV lot Thursday night at 10 p.m. I'll bring my F-250. We'll haul it under the cover of dark so nobody gets cute with a tow truck. Thank you, I choked out. Don't thank me yet. Garrett's place is a shithole, but it's a safe shithole. I spent the next 2 days living off boiled pinto beans and tap water. I didn't leave my apartment except to walk around the block when the walls felt too close. I didn't check my business social media pages. I knew they were still bleeding followers, still drowning in the fake one-star reviews Derek's crypto network was generating. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for Thursday night. At exactly 9:45 p.m. on Thursday, I was standing at the gates of the RV facility. The night air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of hot asphalt. Conrad pulled up in his battered diesel-belching Ford F-250. I swiped my keycard for the last time. The gates opened. We drove back to the Airstream, hooked the heavy steel hitch to Conrad's truck, and crossed the safety chains. I locked the deadbolt on the service door. We didn't say much on the drive. I followed behind him in my Honda, watching the taillights of my livelihood bounce over the uneven pavement as we left Austin city limits and headed east toward Bastrop. The highway lights faded, replaced by the dark, empty stretches of rural Texas roads lined with dense pine trees. We pulled into Garrett Kellner's salvage yard a little past midnight. The place was exactly as Conrad had described it. A sprawling dirt lot surrounded by a 12-foot corrugated metal fence topped with razor wire. Stacks of crushed sedans and rusted-out pickup trucks loomed in the darkness like metal skeletons. Garrett was waiting by the gate. He was a massive guy in a stained mechanic's jumpsuit holding a heavy mag light. He didn't smile. He just shined the light at the Airstream, then pointed toward a cleared patch of dirt behind a mountain of blown-out semi-tires. Conrad backed the rig into the spot perfectly. We unhitched it, dropping the stabilizer jacks into the soft dirt. Keep the door locked, Garrett grunted, coming over to inspect the hitch. I got dogs that patrol the yard at night. They won't bother the aluminum, but if you come out here to grab something after hours, you stay in your car and honk 3 times first. Got it? Got it, I said. Garrett, I appreciate this. I'll make rent as soon as my account's clear. Conrad says you're good for it. That's enough for me, Garrett said, turning off his flashlight. Conrad clapped me on the shoulder, got back in his truck, and headed back toward the city. I stood in the dirt alone, looking up at the silver curve of the Airstream. It looked totally alien sitting there among the rusted scrap metal and weeds, but it was safe. Duncan couldn't impound it. Silas couldn't inspect it. Aunt Linda couldn't touch it. I got into my Honda and started the long drive back to my apartment. The adrenaline of the move was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I just wanted to sleep for 14 hours. I pulled into my neighborhood around 1:30 a.m. and parked on the street. I walked up the wooden stairs to my garage apartment, unlocked the door, and collapsed onto the mattress without taking off my boots. I was just drifting off when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room. It was a text message from an unknown number. I picked it up, my eyes straining against the harsh blue light. A junkyard in Bastrop? Really, Marcus? That's where you're hiding? You think putting it behind a fence changes anything? Sign the contract. My blood turned to ice. I sat up in bed, the phone trembling in my hand. I had told no one. Only Conrad knew about Garrett's yard, and Conrad didn't know Derek. We drove in the dead of night. No one followed us. I checked my rearview mirror the entire way out to the county line. There were no headlights tailing me. How did he know? Within an hour of dropping it off, he knew exactly where it was. I threw my boots back on, grabbed my keys, and ran down the stairs. I drove back to Bastrop like a madman, breaking every speed limit on Highway 71. The panic was entirely physical now, a tight band wrapped around my chest, making it hard to pull air into my lungs. I pulled up to Garrett's gate at 2:45 a.m. I didn't get out of the car. I remembered the dogs. I laid on the horn, 3 short blasts. A few minutes later, the heavy metal gate rattled and slid open. Garrett was standing there holding a shotgun, looking incredibly irritated. I told you to honk if you needed something, not wake up the whole damn county, Garrett barked. I'm sorry, I said, putting the car in park and jumping out. Someone tracked me. My cousin knows the rig is here. Garrett lowered the barrel of the shotgun, his eyes narrowing. Nobody followed you in. I was watching the cameras. They didn't follow me, I said, jogging past him toward the Airstream. They planted something on it. I clicked on my phone's flashlight and crawled under the chassis of the trailer. The dirt was damp and smelled like motor oil. I dragged myself on my back, shining the light along the heavy steel frame, checking the axles, the wiring harness, the leaf springs. I checked the back bumper. Nothing. I checked the wheel wells. Nothing. Then I shined the beam up toward the front of the trailer, where the twin metal propane tanks sat mounted behind the hitch. Tucked deep into the narrow gap between the curved aluminum body and the base of the left propane tank was a tiny, perfectly square piece of black electrical tape. It blended in perfectly with the shadow. I reached up and peeled the tape back. Stuck underneath was a white plastic disc, no larger than a quarter. An Apple AirTag. I stared at it in my palm. They must have planted it the day they broke the padlock at the commissary kitchen. While Aunt Linda and Mom were distracting me, pretending to measure the espresso machines, Derek must have slipped outside and taped this to the propane mount. He had been tracking my movements for weeks. He knew when I went to the RV lot. He knew when I went to the commissary. He watched the little digital blip move across his phone screen from the comfort of his living room. It was a terrifyingly simple, totally grounded violation. It wasn't a sophisticated spy operation. It was just a $50 piece of consumer electronics bought at a Best Buy, used to mentally break me. Find something? Garrett asked, walking over. I crawled out from under the rig and held up the little white disc. Garrett scoffed in disgust. Coward shit. I didn't say a word. I dropped the AirTag onto the hard-packed dirt. I raised my heavy work boot and stomped down as hard as I could. The plastic casing shattered with a sharp crack, the tiny circuit board inside grinding into the gravel. Can he see if it breaks? Garrett asked. Yeah, I said, my voice eerily calm. He'll get a notification that the signal was lost. Good. Let him wonder. I drove back to Austin as the sun started to come up, painting the Texas sky a bruised purple. I didn't feel panicked anymore. The AirTag had crossed a line in my head. It stripped away the last lingering shred of familial obligation I didn't even know I was still holding on to. They weren't just greedy. They were actively predatory. At 9 a.m., I was sitting in my apartment drinking a glass of tap water when Ellis called. I'm at the courthouse, Ellis said. The echo of a marble hallway hummed in the background. frowned. The judge just reviewed our emergency motion. And? I asked, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. Judge Durbin didn't just approve the motion to lift the freeze on your accounts, Ellis said, his voice ringing with a fierce professional satisfaction. He was so appalled by the transcript of your mother's voicemail that he issued a bench warrant for Derek. I stopped breathing. A warrant? A civil arrest warrant for failure to appear and show cause for the fraudulent lien. The judge has scheduled a mandatory show cause hearing for Tuesday morning. Derek has to stand in front of a district judge and explain, under oath, exactly what services Halverson Enterprises provided to earn a $42,000 lien. And if he lies, he commits perjury. What about my money? The bank order is being processed as we speak. Your operating capital will be unfrozen by close of business today. I hung up the phone and slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the linoleum floor. I buried my face in my hands. It was the first time in a month I felt like I could actually draw a full breath. We were going to court. We were pulling Derek out of the shadows and forcing him into a room where he couldn't lie his way out. At 4:30 p.m., my phone pinged with a notification from my banking app. Status update, account hold lifted. Available balance, 4,120 data zekos. I actually laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound in the empty apartment. I immediately transferred $1,000 to my personal checking, drove to the ATM, and pulled out cash. Then I went straight to the discount grocery store and bought real food. Chicken, vegetables, coffee, milk. I spent the weekend prepping. I couldn't operate the trailer, but I could operate myself. I ironed my only suit. I reviewed every single receipt for my restoration build. I organized the Home Depot invoices, the electrical diagrams, the plumbing manifests. I printed out the photos of me covered in fiberglass dust, ripping out the interior of the Airstream. I put it all in a neat tabbed binder for Ellis. Tuesday morning, I walked into the Travis County Courthouse. The air conditioning was freezing. The floors were polished granite. I met Ellis outside courtroom 4B. He looked sharp, entirely in his element, holding a thick leather briefcase. Just let me do the talking, Ellis said as we pushed through the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom was mostly empty, just a few clerks shuffling papers at the front. We sat at the plaintiff's table. 5 minutes later, the doors opened again. Derek walked in. He was wearing the same ill-fitting suit he wore in the Facebook video. He looked pale, his usual arrogant swagger completely gone. He was sweating heavily, his eyes darting around the room. But he wasn't alone. Walking right behind him, carrying a sleek silver briefcase, was a woman in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. She walked with the kind of predatory confidence that made the air in the room shift. Ellis stiffened beside me. I saw his jaw clench. "Who is that?" I whispered. "That," Ellis said, his voice dangerously low, "is Vivian Strand. She's a partner at the most expensive corporate defense firm in Austin." Derek and Vivian sat down at the defense table. Derek wouldn't look at me. Vivian did. She looked at me the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, evaluating the weak spots, calculating the yield. "How can he afford her?" I asked Ellis, panic flaring back to life in my chest. "He doesn't have any real money. His crypto startups are all scams." Ellis didn't answer. He was staring at Vivian Strand as she calmly opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents 3 inches thick. "All rise!" the bailiff called out. Judge Durbin took the bench. He was an older man with a stern face and absolutely zero patience in his eyes. He sat down, opened a file folder, and peered over his reading glasses. "All right, docket number 44B, Halverson versus Halverson Enterprises," the judge said, his voice echoing in the large room. "We're here on an emergency motion to expunge a mechanic's lien and a show cause order for the defendant. Mr. Brennan, you represent the plaintiff." "Yes, Your Honor," Ellis said, standing up. "We are here because the defendant filed a demonstrably fraudulent lien to extort my client, intentionally paralyzed his business operations, and weaponized city health codes to force a hostile takeover." "Strong words, counsel," Judge Durbin said. He turned to the defense table. "Mrs. Strand, you're appearing for the defendant?" "I am, Your Honor," Vivian said, standing gracefully. Her voice was smooth, highly polished, and entirely devoid of nerves. "And while Mr. Brennan's narrative is certainly dramatic, it is entirely fictional. We are not here to dispute a fraudulent lien. We are here to enforce a legitimate corporate debt." "I have the plaintiff's receipts right here," Judge Durbin said, tapping a finger on my binder, "showing he purchased all materials and performed the labor." "We do not dispute that the plaintiff performed the physical labor, Your Honor," Vivian said calmly. "We dispute who funded it." She picked up a single sheet of paper from her stack and walked it up to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. She walked a copy over to our table and placed it in front of Ellis. I looked down at the paper. It was a bank wire transfer record dated 3 years ago. It showed a transfer of $25,000 from an account named Linda Halverson Living Trust into my personal savings account. "What is this?" Ellis hissed at me under his breath. I stared at the paper, the blood draining from my face. "It was a gift," I whispered frantically. "When I first bought the shell of the Airstream, I didn't have enough to cover the initial plumbing overhaul. Aunt Linda offered to help. She explicitly said it was an early inheritance gift. She refused to let me sign a promissory note." Vivian Strand turned back to the judge. 3 years ago, my client's mother, Linda Halverson, provided $25,000 in seed capital for this mobile vending project. However, the plaintiff failed to mention that the funds were transferred from a family trust account managed by Halverson Enterprises. It was not a gift, Your Honor. It was a corporate investment. The lien filed by my client is merely the legal recuperation of that principal investment, plus 3 years of standard compounding commercial interest, bringing the total debt to exactly $42,000. The courtroom was dead silent. "Furthermore," Vivian continued, her voice echoing perfectly off the marble walls, "we have sworn affidavits from 3 family members confirming the plaintiff verbally agreed to surrender equity in exchange for the capital. The plaintiff is attempting to use the court to steal corporate funds. We are formally requesting the lien be upheld, and we are countersuing Marcus Halverson for breach of contract and fraud." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Ellis, expecting him to be scrambling, flipping through my binder for a defense. Instead, Ellis didn't even blink. He just let the silence in the courtroom stretch out for 3 long seconds. Then he stood up, casually buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor," Ellis said, his voice entirely calm, "may I ask Ms. Strand a clarifying question regarding Defense Exhibit A?" "Proceed," Judge Durbin said, looking over his glasses. Ellis turned to Vivian. "Ms. Strand, does the wire transfer document you just submitted show the funds originating from Halverson Enterprises?" Vivian narrowed her eyes slightly. "It originated from the Linda Halverson Living Trust, which is the primary funding vehicle for Halverson Enterprises." "I see," Ellis said. He reached into his own leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper with a blue state seal at the top. He handed it to the clerk to pass to the judge, then walked a copy over to Vivian. "Your Honor, this is the official corporate filing for Halverson Enterprises from the Texas Secretary of State. I pulled it yesterday." Judge Durbin looked at the paper. "Incorporation date is February 12th of this year." "Exactly," Ellis said, turning back to the bench. "Halverson Enterprises was formed exactly 8 months ago. The wire transfer Ms. Strand just entered into evidence is dated 3 years ago. A corporate entity cannot issue a commercial loan, demand equity, or charge compounding interest 2.5 years before it legally exists." The courtroom got very quiet. I looked at Vivian Strand. The predatory confidence vanished from her face. face in an instant, replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. She slowly turned her head to look at Derek. Derek was sweating so heavily his collar was soaked. He looked like he wanted to sink right through the granite floor. Ellis wasn't done. He stepped right up to the podium. Furthermore, Your Honor, let's look at the actual text of the mechanic's lien my client's cousin filed. The lien specifically claims Halverson Enterprises provided $42,000 in custom fabrication and electrical work. Now Mrs. Strand is pivoting the narrative to claim it was a cash investment of $25,000 that somehow accrued $17,000 in interest. So which is it? Did they install equipment or did they wire cash? Because swearing to false physical labor on a county lien to freeze a competitor's bank account is perjury. And Miss Strand's own exhibit just proved her client committed it. Judge Durbin didn't say a word. He just stared at Derek. The silence was heavier than a physical weight. Miss Strand, the judge finally said, his voice dangerously soft. Did you verify the incorporation dates before filing this countersuit? Vivian stood up. She didn't look at Derek again. She looked entirely at the judge, operating in pure preservation mode. Your Honor, I was retained on this matter yesterday evening. I relied entirely on the sworn representations and affidavits provided by my client regarding the timeline of his corporate assets. I request a brief recess to confer with my client. Denied, Judge Durbin snapped. He took off his reading glasses and tossed them onto the bench. There is nothing to confer about. Your client walked into my courtroom and attempted to use a personal cash gift from 3 years ago to retroactively justify a fraudulent corporate mechanics lien today. This is an egregious abuse of the legal system. The judge grabbed his pen. The emergency motion is granted. The mechanics lien is struck down with prejudice. The bank freeze is permanently lifted. Furthermore, I am ordering the defendant, Derek Halverson, to pay all of the plaintiff's legal fees incurred in this matter, payable within 30 days. Derek jumped up from his chair. You can't do that. That's our family money. Sit down and shut your mouth, Mr. Halverson, the judge barked, pointing a finger directly at him, or you will be leaving this courtroom in handcuffs. I'm drafting a referral to the district attorney's office for perjury and filing false public records. You are incredibly lucky I'm not holding you in criminal contempt right this second. Derek sank back into his chair, his face entirely bloodless. Mr. Brennan, the judge said, looking at Ellis, draft the order for the fees. We're adjourned. The gavel cracked. The sound echoed off the wood paneling like a gunshot. I sat at the table, my hands resting flat on the wood. It was over. The suffocating weight that had been crushing my chest for the last month just evaporated. I looked at Ellis. He was quietly packing his briefcase, looking bored. Come on, Ellis said. Let's go get your life back. We walked out of the courtroom and pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the hallway. My mother and Aunt Linda were waiting on the marble benches outside. They must not have been allowed in during the proceedings. When they saw us walk out, Mom immediately stood up, clutching her purse. Her face was tight with forced optimism. Marcus, she said, stepping into my path. Did you sign it? Did we get this all sorted out? Derek pushed through the doors behind me. He looked physically ill. Aunt Linda took one look at his face, and her smug expression dropped. Derek, Linda asked, her voice shrill. What happened? Where's Vivian? Vivian just quit, Derek said hollowly, staring at the floor. She said she's billing us for her time and reporting me to the bar ethics committee for handing her forged documents. Mom turned back to me, her eyes wide with sudden panic. Marcus, what did you do? I stopped walking. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, who had skipped my grand opening to cheer for a scam artist, who had given out my security codes, who had used my permit as a weapon to extort me. I didn't do anything, Mom, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt nothing. Derek lied to a judge. He's paying my lawyer, and he's probably going to be indicted for perjury. You can't let them arrest him, Aunt Linda screamed, lunging forward. Tell the judge you made a mistake. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Don't ever contact me again, I said, looking right through her. I looked at my mother. Any of you. Marcus, please, Mom said, reaching out to grab my arm. We're family. I stepped back, out of her reach. No, we're not. Families take care of each other. You tried to bleed me dry. I turned and walked down the hallway with Ellis. I didn't look back. I didn't listen to Linda crying or my mother calling my name. We got into the elevator, the doors slid shut, and the marble hallway disappeared. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was holding a certified court order signed by Judge Durbin stating that Derek Halverson and Halverson Enterprises had absolutely no legal standing, ownership, or authority regarding my business. I drove straight to the city health department. I slammed the court order and a copy of the active restraining order on the clerk's desk. It took them an hour to get Silas's supervisor on the phone. When the supervisor realized an inspector had issued a suspension based on an email from an extortionist with a bench warrant, the backpedaling was immediate. My permit was reinstated before I even left the building. I got into my Honda and drove out to Bastrop. Conrad was already there, leaning against his F-250, smoking a cigarette. He saw me pull up, took one look at my face, and crushed the cigarette under his boot. Good day in court? Conrad asked. The best, I said. We hitched up the Airstream. We towed it back to Austin, right past the city limits, right through the heavy afternoon traffic. We pulled it back into the commissary lot. Faye was standing by the loading dock. She saw the rig, saw me step out of the car, and gave me a single firm nod. I unlocked the service door and stepped inside the trailer. It was blazing hot and smelled like stale air, but it was mine. All of it. The stainless steel, the copper wiring, the dual-group espresso machine. I turned on the generator. The familiar hum vibrated through the floorboards. I flipped the switch on the espresso boiler. I listened to the water pump kick on, drawing fresh water through the lines. I opened a fresh bag of beans, the rich, dark smell of roasted coffee filling the narrow space. I ground the beans. I tamped the portafilter. I locked it into the group head and pulled a single, perfect shot of espresso. The crema was thick and golden. I leaned against the prep counter, looking out the serving window at the dusty gravel lot, drinking my coffee in the quiet hum of the afternoon.